everybody. Welcome back to Flipping the Barrel podcast, the podcast where we interview and deep dive into the stories of energy leaders across our industry and find out more about their career and life journey. Today, we have Amanda McMillian, who's the president and CEO of United Way of Greater Houston. She has over 20 years of experience in our industry, and she is a wealth of knowledge, and she has quite the unique story and career journey starting from her law school degree. So, Amanda, thank you so much for being here, and we can't wait to just find out more about you.
Well, thanks for having me. And first, I have to say, I know that like everybody's doing it at this point, but I'm going to do it as well. Jamie, Massiel, for both of you, I think what you're doing in this space right now is so amazing and important. I loved being at the Pursuing Greatness event a few weeks ago to see that room packed full of 400 women who are there to share stories and support each other through their own professional and personal journeys. So just thank you for what you do. It's really amazing.
Amanda, thank you so much for giving us that feedback. It's so great to hear, especially since you were it was one of the first times you came to one of our events, and we were really excited about this one because it was 400 women. In the past, they've been around 250. So we almost doubled in capacity, and I'm just so glad to hear that you had such a great time. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited to get into your journey. You grew up in Huntsville, Texas, which is where I went to school, and it's definitely a small town feel. I know now it's a lot bigger than what it was back then, especially since the university has grown so much. Your dad worked in the prison, which is very familiar to that area because the prison's right there, and your mom in retail. You learned a lot from your parents growing up. Y'all all very close, and it was just a really good atmosphere. And Huntsville is like that. It's very family oriented. Would love to hear about what it was like growing up in that small town and having that opportunity to just be so close with your family and your grandparents that also live close by.
Yeah, I definitely felt really lucky growing up, and it's it's interesting, right? I think we have so many colleagues across the energy space where, their work experience or excuse me, their life experience, excuse me, the work experience or their life experience takes them all over the world. They're traveling frequently, and growing up, I had none of that. I was in Huntsville, Texas, for the first 18 years of my life. All of my like immediate and extended family were within about a 30-mile radius. And that really was special. I think from a parenting perspective, it was so helpful because both of my parents were working. So they had that village, to rely on when they needed help. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, and having that family time, of course, was really important. But I think about that today, and it feels like there's a broader geographic dispersion of families more so than there used to be. And I think that for particularly for young parents, if they don't have that kind of safety net, if you will, their village of relatives or other close friends or family members helping them out, I think that can be more of a challenge for people today. But that was definitely a really wonderful and special part of my upbringing, being part of that environment, growing up and having family gatherings on a regular basis. We actually still have a small place on the lake in Huntsville where my grandparents lived, and it's just a very special place for us still. And of course, eat 'em up cats because we love Sam Houston State University.
Awesome. I'm going to have to go visit. So, when you turned 15, when we first spoke to you, you mentioned that, it was a hard year for you because your parents got divorced at that time. And I know for a lot of people who go through a parent's divorce at a young age, it will impact you for the rest of your life, no matter how you see it. Tell us a little bit about that and your mother's independence of just having to do life on her own and be financially, independent at the same time, and how that just kind of shaped even who you became as, a very successful woman herself.
Yeah, it even kind of shaped in a way the decision to come to United Way. When I think about it, I have to say I was really lucky in that my parents had an amicable divorce. And again, right, going back to those relationships and being in a small town. I mean, my dad's first roommate after the divorce was actually my mom's brother. So they took their co-parenting role very seriously, and they do to this day. And so they really modeled that behavior really well. And it's great because it's something that my kids still see today. And so I deeply appreciate how, they needed to make a change. I fully endorse the change. And they handled it with such compassion and thoughtfulness. And so I think that was really helpful. And I do think it was really important for me to see, my mom, because both of my parents were working, my mom could immediately stand on her own 2 feet. She had financial independence. She had some financial stability. And we did struggle financially growing up. And that financial struggle did get harder for both of my parents when they weren't living together, right? That means their expenses were going up. They were having to rearrange their lives in a different kind of way. Um, they were both employed. And with my mom being in retail, I also saw, it probably, it hit me harder later, I think, just looking back and seeing how many women were coming into her workplace in retail trying to get their financial footing for the first time after a life change like a divorce. And I still remember, I will never forget this. I had just started college at Southwestern University, and my mom and I, we were driving down I-35 somewhere, and we were having a spirited discussion about my decision to major in political science. And she was like, you have to be financially independent. You never know what's going to come your way. And you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. And how are you going to make any money with a political science degree? We had a big, I'll call it discussion about that. But that really did shape me, right? It made me, she really ingrained in me the need to stand on my own 2 feet no matter what, so I could take care of myself down the road.
Well, I think that was something that you obviously actually you really did. But you didn't end up going into political science. You decided to become a lawyer, which is when I hear your story and I just hear about where you started and where you got to today, it's very interesting to see that at that time you thought maybe a law degree would have been like the best fit for you. And a lot of times I know people when they go to college, they really don't know what they want to do. And so it'd be great to hear if maybe there was a reason or anything in particular that pushed you towards becoming a lawyer. But when you got into law, I have heard this many times before too, it's a lot of long hours. And I think sometimes we glorify like being lawyers because you see them win these big testaments to what if they're in civil law or if they're doing environmental law or whatever it is, and then you see the dollar amount that people win and you're just like, wow, lawyer is so glorified. But there's a lot of hours and reading and stuff that goes into it. What did you think about becoming a lawyer when you finally graduated and you started, and more importantly, did it ever meet like your expectations of kind of what you thought you would be doing?
That's such a great question. And I don't know how it works in other professions like engineering, I will say that. But, I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning. And going through this discovery process in law school of like all of the different ways to practice law was very eye opening for me. So initially, I went to law school because I really wanted to do international law with my political science background. I was fascinated with political systems and international law, which doesn't really have an executive branch if you think about it, which I always found just at least academically fascinating. And I ended up falling in love with corporate law, which I was not expecting. I ended up having a great summer clerkship with the firm I ended up going to work for, Aiken Gump Strauss Hauer and Feld. But it was the same kind of construct in that I wasn't arguing cases before kind of a neutral third party judge. I was trying to convince the very biased other side that they should do things the way my client wanted to do them. Right? We were negotiating merger and acquisition transactions. We were doing capital markets transactions. And so that was, I would say, a surprise to me, but I loved being part of that practice. I was at a firm that did it very well. And I went to a kind of big law firm, not necessarily to make partner, but to learn as much as I could. And I had a tremendous opportunity to do that there. And I am very competitive. So I, also wanted to kind of kick butt and take names, but a big part of that really was being in a space where I could learn as much as possible and really excel in my field. But I will say my law firm did a good job as summer clerks of not sugarcoating what it was going to take to do that. So I knew what I was getting into when I started from an hours perspective.
So let's get into those 3,000 plus hours that you have to put in when you become a lawyer. And we've actually featured a few lawyers, and they've all come up to us at some point and said that, like, there was a point where I was working so many hours a week, and it's kind of expected, but you burn out a little bit, and you kind of see it on TV shows, etc., where like the law side is very, very heavy in terms of just you don't have any work-life balance or really any life outside of the firm. So at this point, you kind of realize you were maybe getting a little bit burnt out and this just wasn't the life for you. And so that's when you decided to move and leave your job and then go to one of your customers, I believe, which was Anadarko Petroleum at the time. And so can you tell us a little bit about just when you realized or being self-aware of like when is too much and when is it no longer serving your purpose in that career and looking at doing something else?
I think it depends on the individual. I was having I was meeting up with a former colleague and friend of mine just yesterday, actually, and former chairman of one of the big law firms in town, and is no longer in that administrative role, pretty close to retirement, and was the third highest biller in his firm last year, and he loved it. And so it depends on the person for sure. I would say for the work that I was doing, a lot of it is just the nature of the beast, right? You are you have a client bring you in, they want to acquire another company, you're trying to get it done as quickly as possible before it leaks to the press, or you're doing capital markets transactions where the timing's very, very sensitive. But for some people, you do reach a point where it is kind of grinding you down. More than a little bit. And for me, it was that year when I was on pace for a 3,000 hour year where I was like, okay, my husband and I wanted to have a family. I'd actually had a miscarriage during that time, which not everybody knows. And that was really, really hard. And so I did come down to Houston from the Dallas office because I did think there might be an opportunity to work in house for a client down here, and I was very lucky in that one of the clients I had worked for previously had become general counsel at Anadarko Petroleum, and we had the opportunity to come on board as their securities counsel. And then I very quickly got an offer to come in house. So sometimes the universe just aligns, but you do have to. I think that people can get caught up in the grind of the work and look up and it's maybe been longer than they expect. And I will say, I actually still to this day, and this may just be the Gen Xer in me, I don't know, but I do still advise a lot of people that it's okay to just lose yourself in your job for a while. Lose yourself in your job, bill a ton of hours, learn as much as you can, become a subject matter expert, and then decide how you want to build on that for the future. And that's where I think you can make some really good strategic choices around how much time do I want to spend on this? Is there a smarter way to do that? And I'll say too, if I just looking back to a couple of my colleagues, I do think I had a couple of colleagues at the time who had really modeled that balance a little better. I should have been probably paying attention to that. And also some friends who really just built some process around their work that they could lean on to maybe do things efficiently and kind of take some of the chaos out of the process.
Did you find when you moved to Anadarko that there was a difference as far as like culture or overall feeling of like working from a big firm where I feel like and that both industries are pretty male dominated, but it seems like that transition, was it easier? Did you feel more confident or more comfortable working inside a larger, like a company type atmosphere than just a law firm where maybe even there is a little bit more of that competition between lawyers? Whereas inside Anadarko, it's very specific, like you're working for Anadarko, right? So therefore, maybe that competition is not really there across the board like it would be working for a law firm. And for people that are in that situation where maybe they do want to transition, or maybe they're a consultant for a company and they want to work for that company that maybe they're consulting for, what is your advice on how can they get in and work for them directly versus just always consulting or being, an advisor for that operator or for that company in general?
That is such a great question. So a big driver for me going in house was absolutely also this dynamic of, okay, I can get the call on a Friday at 5 to go execute on this decision that my client has made, or I can go in house and be at the table and be part of the decision. And so so I think a big motivator for me was kind of wanting to be at that table and be more engaged in the strategy around that. And I will say there's this, I'm going to call it a little bit of a myth around your clients. I definitely at the time thought, okay, it'd be so nice to just have one client, so I'm not, juggling between all these clients on all these deals. And I will say the competition dynamic, our team at our firm had a magnificent esprit de corps. The time I had at Aiken Gump, particularly in Houston, working with the team there, was just magical in terms of the friendships, relationships, and camaraderie. So that really wasn't too much of a challenge there. But then you get in house and you just learn this, like, actually you still have several clients. It could be the treasury department versus financial accounting, versus the team in Colorado who wants to make sure we're getting this acquisition done. So you do still end up with competing priorities, but you are definitely all serving the same mission, and you're all serving the same stakeholders at the end of the day. But I loved that transition in house. I thought it was fantastic, and I very quickly felt like I had a seat at the table in terms of making future decisions around our portfolio and our assets and our strategy. It was great.
So, Amanda, you became EVP and GC at Anadarko, which is a huge deal, and a lot of hard work to get to those positions, right? This is really climbing the corporate ladder. Two questions in here. One, what was it like finding mentors or sponsors to get you to where you wanted to be, and just how crucial that is for a successful career? And second, did you ever aspire to become a leader in a big oil company like that? Or not even just oil company, but as a young girl, did you think like one day I want that, shiny corner office? And like, was that an aspiration of yours, or did it just kind of happen?
It was not on the radar screen for me in that sense, right? I did not sit around going, I can't wait to be the chief legal officer of an NYSE listed independent exploration and production company. Not a thing I was thinking about when I was, heading off to dance class or, playing football with my cousins in the yard or anything. So, but I did get there, and I think part of this is the competitive thing, but part of this is absolutely also related to the first part of your question around mentors and champions. I was very lucky. I keep talking about luck in this podcast. I will say luck favors the prepared. So that's a big takeaway for today. I think that's really important. Growing into your expertise, being respected for your expertise, and then being able to take that next step into leadership if that's where you want to go. But I was very lucky to have a number of mentors and champions along the way. And I know y'all talk about this also, right? In terms of mentors versus champions, it's important to have mentors and sounding boards, but having sponsors or champions, it kind of has to be organic in many ways. And it's also really important because you do want to have somebody is going to have your back when you're not in the room. And I was lucky to have that. My general counsel at the time for both of my pregnancies, when I went in, was like, hey, I have some news. The very first thing Bobby Reeves said was, you take as much time as you want for maternity leave and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And if you start getting pressure, you come let me know. And so to have that kind of support to kind of help you set some boundaries was critical. And then also having people just see your work and champion your work, that does open up other opportunities. And that's where, as a leader, you also have to do the same thing, right? You have to proactively seek out opportunities for other people on your team to give them a shot at seeing the people who are in the boardroom, right? Seeing the people who may not see their everyday work, but can give them an opportunity to shine. And so I think that piece of this is really, really important. And remind me your second question.
No, I think you answered both. It was really just if those aspirations and if you know how important mentors and sponsors were. So you answered it.
I will add to that. I think part of the aspiration kind of comes with the territory, right? I think particularly if you're kind of driven, and you want yourself to do well, you want your team to do well, you want your company to do well. You are going to have moments where you look at things and think to yourself, if I were in charge of that, I feel like we could do a better job. And you just have to trust your gut and make it happen. And so there was that kind of drive. And then even looking at where I am today, it was actually one of our board members who introduced me at an event and said, Amanda's going to be CEO somewhere someday. I kind of looked at him and I was like, oh. And so he just kind of, created that, he planted that seed for me, right? And gave me the opportunity to think about myself in that way. And I think that's an important part of it too. And that also comes back to having incredible mentors and champions along the way.
I think hearing that too from somebody that you look up to or somebody that is your mentor, they kind of know you too. And so for them to be like, hey, you're going to be CEO, you start to like visualize it yourself. And I think that's so important in anybody's journey to have those visualizations of where they might want to go. You talked a lot about how incredible it was working at Anadarko, and you were there for 15 years. So what I'm very interested in is how Anadarko to United Way, and why? Like, what was that transition like? Did somebody call you one day and say, "Hey, we think you'd be great working over here at United Way"? It's such a different operation and aspect in general, a different goal, a different strategy. It's a nonprofit. It's completely different than working for an operator as a VP and GC of Anadarko. It's just night and day in my view. Would really like to know, how did you make that process and make that decision? And then how has it been given that you were at like a very corporate, very structured, not like United Way is not structured, but it was just like, a very structured type operator to a nonprofit that's one of the largest in the world, I would say. I think United Way is everywhere. How were you able to take that on? And did you have any thoughts too? Like, is this something I can do? Like, what am I getting myself into?
Yes, especially since I started on May 1st of 2020, which is like right after a bunch of things shut down at the beginning of the pandemic. But in terms of the journey here, Anadarko had been a huge United Way supporter. I'll also say generally, I think many of us at Anadarko felt very mission oriented in our work. We were really focused, right, on bringing energy to the people and serving our shareholders well. And so I feel like our team really had kind of a sense of mission in our work, which I think I now look back and reflect on that and think that that's probably a little rarer in the corporate world than I might have appreciated at the time. But it was definitely something that I valued and didn't take for granted. And United Way at Anadarko, Anadarko had the third largest United Way workplace campaign in our region. So I was familiar with the work. I got more familiar with the work after Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And we had kind of our first kind of officer, we're all like sitting in the dark with our notepads on our phones after we've charged them in our cars, right? And our CES, had three things. Is everyone safe? How do we help everybody bridge the gap financially until FEMA shows up? And call Anna Babin, who was my predecessor, give her $1 million and start talking to everybody else about doing the same, because everybody's going to need a lot of help. I was like, wow, that's okay. And then to have her come to campus and talk about the incredible power of the long-term recovery work that organizations like United Way do in the community was very impactful. So I think if those two things hadn't happened, I don't know if I would have taken the call later. Fast forward, Anadarko gets acquired by Oxy in August of 2019. I have the blessing and the opportunity to go do whatever I want to next. And I had been thinking about a role that was more full-time in terms of serving the community, even though as part of the fabric of the culture at Anadarko, we were strongly encouraged to be engaged in the communities where we live and work. So I did get a call from one of my mentors in the energy space, who was also chairing the search committee for Anna's successor. And she said, hey, let's go to lunch. I was like, okay, let's go have lunch. I had no idea what was coming. She said, I have a great opportunity for you. I said, wow, that's a really big job. So obviously I went through that process and ended up here. And I'll say too, and sometimes people are surprised to hear this, I do think there are a lot of skills we build muscle around in the energy space that actually, and in several corporate spaces, that translate very well into the nonprofit context, particularly at the time that I came on board at United Way. You know, crisis management, communications, strategy, all those kinds of things that were part and parcel of my day-to-day work at Anadarko, I could translate directly into action when I arrived at United Way. So I think those skills and the leadership skills and the other tactical skills that I developed at Anadarko really have served me well in this context also.
So, quick one. For people who may not be super familiar with United Way, tell us a little bit about what you do in the community for anybody who's wondering or who would like to be involved, because you're a big part of Houston.
Yes, and thank you for that. United Way is all about connecting people to possibility. A lot of people don't necessarily see this every day, but 14% of households across Greater Houston are struggling on wages below the federal poverty line. And then we have another 31% of households who are struggling above that federal poverty line. They're sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs, and they're still struggling to afford the basics from month to month. And that's where United Way comes in. So we bring together donors, volunteers, community partners around a focused plan to help people not just land on their feet, but stay there. And that was kind of a strategic shift for us that was happening. It was really a big part of why I came into this job. So going back to the very beginning of this conversation, right? My family struggled financially growing up. I was a Pell Grant recipient in college. I was, digging through my couch cushions looking for change to put a gallon of gas in the tank of my car. And so to be part of a strategy where we can actually help people with long-term financial stability, and that was really resonated with me. And that is part of the new work we're doing today. We're still helping people cover the basics. That safety net's critical. We're still operating to the 211 Texas United Way helpline, which is the largest social services helpline of its kind in the country, connected over 1.2 million people across Texas to help and hope last year through critical programs and services. And we're a critical convener in the community. So we really do try to bring several stakeholders in the community together to kind of solve the complex challenges that are holding our neighbors back, and again, making sure our neighbors can land on their feet and stay there. But that was a big pull for me coming into this role, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to be part of that work every day.
I mean, I think it's really amazing just to see what you were able to do and how you were able to come from this small town in Huntsville, Texas, and then you had that hard time when you're 15 years old and your parents divorced and you got to watch your mother, really become that independent mom that really kind of pushed you. And then you decided, I'm going to go in law. Why not? And then going from law to then becoming like a VP and a GC of one of the largest operators in Houston, might I add, and Midland Basin, to then them being sold, and then you getting such an incredible opportunity to run United Way as a CEO. I just couldn't think of a better transition story where you really never know where you're going to go in life, and you're a prime example of putting in that effort where it matters most, but also following what you're passionate about. You talked a lot about you doing that while you were at Anadarko, and it just fell into place and that opportunity came up. And I think for those listening, sometimes you don't know where that journey is going to go. And maybe it's not in specifically oil and gas. I mean, you went to work for a nonprofit and you've been doing it for almost 4 years now, which is incredible. And you got that CEO role. And I think that it just says a lot about you really, I mean, honestly, you just never know where life might take you. And having those sponsors and mentors to help guide you is so essential, because that really helped you in your career and pushing you to take that step. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing that with us. Probably one of our first CEOs of a nonprofit, especially with this type of incredible transition from an oil and gas, 15 years at Anadarko. Very, very exciting journey. And I think a lot that our listeners can take from and learn from.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here to share my story. And I appreciate the space that y'all are creating for, sometimes you feel pretty alone in this industry, right? You don't feel like you have sponsors and champions and you don't know where to turn. And the work y'all are doing to create some space where people have a place to go if they feel like they don't in that moment, is incredible. So please keep doing what you're doing. It's really, really important. And thanks again for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Amanda. It means a lot coming from you. We know all the work that you put in on the day-to-day basis to help everybody around the world, and we're just doing a small little part. So thank you. And if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a message, email us at flippingthebarrel@gmail.com, and stay tuned for our next podcast. Thank you.